Okay, so in my Notre Dame video, I mentioned that the two primary suspect groups have done vast damage to Western civilization over the centuries and indeed for millennia. And, these suspect groups are obviously, I said they were monotheisms that share a holy land with Christianity. That's obviously Islam and Judaism. So, taking Islam first. Largely collapsed classical civilization. It wasn't the Germanic barbarians. They weren't looking to destroy classical civilization. They were looking to enjoy its trappings. And they didn't destroy classical civilization, even though they did destroy some of the, empires and states and institutions that went along with it. Though decentralized, classical life basically continued until the Muslims started invading and engaging in piracy and slave raiding on the Mediterranean, which made the southern coastlines of Europe essentially uninhabitable and made transportation and communication and travel on the Mediterranean essentially untenable. And previously, this had been the cheapest way to get stuff around. The grain for Rome was coming from Egypt and North Africa across the Mediterranean. And, when you lost this trade, you had a huge collapse in population, wealth. The shorelines became essentially uninhabitable because of the constant depredations of Islamic slave raiders. So they really collapsed classical civilization in the Mediterranean. They took over and destroyed the Byzantine Empire, most notably, Constantinople. But the Byzantine Empire was, for 1,000 years, was a major Western power, Western empire, a major center of Western civilization. And the Seljuk Turks ultimately conquered it and destroyed it and subsumed it into the Ottoman Empire. Starting in 711, you also have repeated incursions of Moorish invaders into the Iberian Peninsula, into Spain. And that lasted from 711 to 1492. So, 700 years, 800 years almost of that business, which was Al-Andalus and also the Reconquista. Tied up the Spanish for 700 years fighting to reclaim their ancestral lands. That's a major loss of potential and productivity and all sorts of other things. Time, energy. Hugely costly. One of the reasons why Spain is still poorer than other Western countries to this day. And then, the Ottoman Empire, which succeeded the Byzantines, at least territorially, if not ethnically or spiritually. The Byzantine Empire was continuously threatening Central Europe into 1683, the Battle of Vienna. And even later, they had numerous wars with the Russians going into the 19th century and even to World War I. All the way up to World War I, the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was a thorn in the side of Europe. So really, really costly. Islam, the defining struggle of Western civilization, has been against Islam for well over 1,000 years. Well over. Almost the entire history of Islam. Somewhere on the order of 1,1400 years. What about the other monotheism from that part of the world, Judaism? Well, I'm not well versed in the history of anti-Goyamism before modern times. I'm sure there are people who know more about that than me. But I can speak to some of the modern costs imposed by particular members of the Jewish faith and ethnicity, including secular Jews. And that would be communism starting in the 19th century. Marxism and a disproportionate number of the communist intellectuals and revolutionaries in Russia, the Soviet Union, in Germany, the revolution of 1919. Something like 12 of the 16 top leaders were Jewish. The Communist Party members in the United States, the spies for the Soviet Union in the United States, the Rosenbergs, those kind of people, selling state secrets to the Soviet Union. A lot of them were Jewish. You have biology denialism. This is also traceable to Jewish influences, particularly David Boaz at Columbia University, who joined the faculty there in 1899 and popularized theories of cultural determinism, that there are no groups, that there are no biological differences between groups of humans, that everything is culturally determined. This kind of biology denialism, there's no such thing as breeds, there's only the canine breed, or the human equivalent. There's no such thing as races, only the human race, right? Where these denialists, these biology denialists, deny the reality of human, subspecific categories, subspecies, human subspecies. And this kind of denialism has been propounded disproportionately by Jewish intellectuals, such as Stephen Jay Gould, who's now, widely known to be a dishonest, hack pseudoscientist. And also Jared Diamond, who's also a dishonest hack pseudoscientist. Came out with Guns, Germs, and Steel in the late 90s. It was a New York best-selling book about, how biological differences are not what propelled Europeans to global dominance. It was geographic fate, geographic luck of the geographic draw. And this book was enormously popular and influential, written by Jared Diamond. And, this guy wrote just a couple years earlier, he wrote a paper about the supposed evolutionary origins of superior Ashkenazi intelligence. So he obviously doesn't believe in this kind of blank slate biology denialism that he propounds in this book, because he accepts biological differences in the case of his own group. Mass immigration, largely a Jewish project. Whether it's Emma Lazarus writing the words about the wretched refuse on the Statue of Liberty, or Israel Zangwill talking about the melting pot in his play of the same name, or Emanuel Seller authoring the 1965 immigration bill in the United States. Jews have been heavily involved in mass immigration and promoting mass immigration, in particular non-white immigration from the Third World. And also neoconservatism. This is an ideology propounded by the Crystals and the Podhoritzes and the Jonah Goldbergs, and that involves a very Israel-centric foreign policy, a very aggressive American foreign policy that while couched in terms of spreading American values, actually ends up being more Israel-centric in practice, pushing Israel's interests, not America's values. Because America's values don't take root in places like Iraq, but that is a regional rival of Israel. And the Iraq War is now edging up on $6 trillion in total cost. $6 trillion. And this war was engineered by, Paul Wolfowitz, Scooter Libby, Elliot Abrams, Elliot Cohen, a lot of these Jewish kind of foreign policy hacks. Cheney and Rumsfeld were not Jewish, but a lot of their staffs, a lot of their aides were. John Bolton, another one. And so this idea, is it a blunder? Is it just a blunder that these guys thought they were going to impose democracy in Iraq? Or maybe some of them had some other idea, and it seems likely that a lot of them did have another idea. Maybe they didn't think democracy was going to work in Iraq, but they knew that they could remove a regional adversary to Israel and replace it, a strong central despotic state with, warring militias and terrorist groups, which they fear relatively a lot less, especially since they have a border wall and can keep them out. And finally, multiculturalism. Multiculturalism has been a way, all this stuff about diversity and enrichment and vibrancy and this stuff that doesn't work. It's the erosion of a high trust homogenous society, the pollution of the gene pool, and all these other terrible costs and consequences. But this multicultural ideology justifies it all. It was a way of continuing the mass immigration project, which has been justified in several ways, over the years. First, there was the melting pot and assimilation. And now there's multiculturalism, where we don't have to assimilate the aliens, and they don't have to assimilate to us. We have to tolerate them. We have to celebrate their cultures of origin. That's the new ideology surrounding this mass immigration phenomenon. And so, a lot of that has to do with Jewish intellectuals as well. Brian Kaplan wrote a famous paper where he talked about how, he's afraid of majorities. And he would like a society where it's just a bunch of different minorities, none of which can gang up on each other. Of course, they're all going to gang up on whites. We know they're all going to gang up on whites. So, that's not a great situation for us. Brian Kaplan thinks it would be a great situation for him and his people, but it's obviously not a great situation for us, because we're made out as the villains and the scapegoat to organize everybody against a common enemy. And so, that's not a very appealing prospect for us, and so he's imposing that fate on us in order to achieve a world that he finds more favorable to himself and his people. I think erroneously, but that's how a lot of them think. So, we have a lot of different ways in which these particular peoples, both of them, have damaged Western civilization tremendously over